Check, 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everyone. So happy to be here today. My name is Samantha, and I'll be the moderator today. And it's so exciting to come together on such an important topic. Today, it's called Brave and Safe, a place for courageous conversations. And I'd like to begin this morning with a land acknowledgement. So we begin today to acknowledge that we walk upon the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. Here in Ottawa, we acknowledge that the location that we dwell on is on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. If you're not joining us from Ottawa, we invite you to reflect upon the land in which you are joining us from. If you're unsure of what traditional land you're on, we invite you to visit nativeland.ca. On behalf of our funder, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, our partners, the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa, and Julian of Norwich Anglican Church, and the organizers, Brianna, Donna, Lee, and Susan, I would like to welcome you here today as we begin the important and sometimes difficult work of learning, unlearning, talking about racism, and finding ways to work together to become anti-racist. Our goal today is to provide a brave, safe, and inclusive space to discuss issues surrounding racism. We are hoping that through hearing the stories of a variety of speakers, you will learn about some of the different forms of racism. Sometimes they're internal, interpersonal, institutional, or structural, and the multitude of ways it presents itself. We are hopeful that by offering this opportunity to learn from the sharing and exchange of life stories and experiences, as well as through a facilitated discussion, you will gain new knowledge that will empower the ways you find ways to affect anti-racism change in your own lives and our environments and communities. We hope you will listen to understand and become social impact leaders, as well as have the opportunity to make some lasting connections. Now, a video from our funder.
Hi everyone, my name is Angela Lee and I'm the Director of Partnerships and Research at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. On behalf of the CRF, I bring warm greetings to the Brave and Safe event, a place for courageous conversations. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation is honored to support this initiative through our National Anti-Racism Fund. I would like to acknowledge that the land I'm speaking from is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and now is home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. I share this both to reflect on the lands that I'm settled on and the immense privileges that this has afforded to me, and as well to affirm the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples who have cared for and continue to care for these lands. It also serves as a personal commitment to the continued work with Indigenous nations and peoples to combat racism and mobilize action on the path towards reconciliation. I'm sorry I couldn't attend in person. I feel energized just reading the description of your agenda and the leadership that you are all taking on. I want to tell you about how the CRF was created, as I think this story connects well with the conversations you're having today. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation was created by the Government of Canada as a Crown Corporation in 1996 and as part of the Japanese-Canadian Redress Agreement, an apology to Japanese Canadians for racial discrimination and internment camps during World War II. The CRF's mandate is to promote the development, sharing, and application of knowledge and expertise in order to contribute to the elimination of racism and all forms of racial discrimination in Canadian society. The conversations and connections you're making today are crucial and create an important space for young leaders in anti-racism to learn from one another, collaborate, and change systems. We are pleased to fund this event and we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you for attending, and we hope that you're inspired by these discussions. Have a great afternoon.
So I have the honor of introducing some layers of a very special person that I've met in our community, Susan Young. So what we'd like to do is I'm going to share some of her layers. She's going to come up and talk, and then I'd love to do a little Q&A with you afterwards, if that's okay, Susan. So, Susan is a registered social service worker with a Bachelor of Arts in Criminology and Psychology. She works full-time for the Sexual Misconduct Response Center and part-time for the Canadian Forces Moral and Welfare Services. Born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, to parents that immigrated from Canada from Trinidad, so fellow West Indian, Susan identifies as Caribbean Canadian. Susan currently volunteers for the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Western University Alumni Association's Ottawa chapter. She is also a part-time vocalist who performs locally under the stage name Susie Q. I've had the honor of hearing her sing. It's absolutely beautiful. When performing, she's often accompanied by her partner in music and life, Sean Duhame. Since February 2021, Susan has been delivering various presentations on anti-racism to youth and to public servants. Susan is very passionate about promoting racial equity through diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please join me in welcoming Susan to the stage.
Thank you, Samantha, for that incredibly warm welcome, and thank you everyone for being here both in person and online. I am a pacer, but for the sake of the video, I will stay put. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to start this talk by just recognizing that, racism, that word, that identifying that as an experience, for me, is something that came later in life. I grew up knowing all along that things here and there were happening to me, to my family, to other members of the BIPOC community, and that they weren't sitting right with me, but it did take me a long time to come to the terms with the fact that racism in particular is the word to describe some of what was happening. And it did take even longer for me to be able to feel comfortable and empowered enough to do something about it, to play a part in eliciting change. And I thought yesterday, as I was finalizing my speech, where does that stem from? Why did it take me so long to come to terms with the fact that racism still very much is something happening right here in Canada? And upon reflection, I believe that a huge reason for that is because when growing up, certainly in my education system, and it could be that that was the case for you as well, I received a lot of messages about how wonderful Canada is. Canada is this great place to live, this great place to be. We are so much better than the US in many ways, and that's really the message that gets hammered home. And also how well-intentioned Canadians are, which causes you to take pause. If something doesn't sit right, we're still thinking, but there's these positive intentions behind it. And for the longest while, I think that perspective served as blinders for the truth about Canada's racist past. And when I say racist past, I think of examples like residential schools that weren't that long ago when you think about how long it was where the last one was closed. And, that's, removing Indigenous children from their family, from their culture, and trying to tell them that their culture is not okay, so you've got to learn the Western way. That's one example that comes to mind, but also thinking about the mistreatment of Chinese migrants when they came to Canada and helped to build the Canadian Pacific Railway out in British Columbia as well. And it caused me to take pause about Canada's racist present. And when I say racist present, some examples that come to mind is not too long ago, the murder of Abdirahman Abdi right here in Ottawa. So if you're not familiar with that, I would certainly encourage you to look into that history right here in Ottawa that we've had. And even more recent than that, on the news, I think in the last week, the Canadian Human Rights Commission just admitted that not even admitted, they're still in denial, but it was founded that they have engaged in discrimination against Black employees at the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And, my message here isn't really to say that Canadians or Canada is bad. It's not to say that there has not been great strides when it comes to anti-racism in general and reconciliation for Indigenous peoples. But this is to stress that we still have a long way to go. And if there's one thing that I hope folks take away from my talk today, is that we all, everyone in this room, everyone online, play an important role in promoting anti-racism and in promoting change. I thought that to make this talk very personable, I could share a few stories about my experiences with racism. And I had to really reflect back on the first instance that I could remember. And I would have been maybe 7 years old. And I was at the school bus stop waiting for the bus to arrive. And as you know, we never choose where the bus stop is going to be. We just go where they tell us the bus stop is going to be. And unfortunately, that was in front of the home of someone who was not very happy to have a bunch of black kids in front of his home. And it started with little microaggressions like, "You all look like chocolate chips in the snow," was one of the first things that I remember being told at 7 years old and being like, everyone's laughing about that, but that seems really rude, but maybe, what do I know, I'm only 7. And as time went by, him just being like, "I'm tired of seeing you people in front of my house every morning." And that escalated to a head when one day he said, "Why don't you all go back to Africa?" I was very confused about that because I was born and raised in Canada. I was, again, 7 years old. But that stuck out to me as very, very horrific to have experienced at that age, with just so much questions and not understanding what was happening. But what also stands out to me about that experience was I had a wonderful ally in the mix. At least one of the parents at the bus stop with us was a white man, and he was with his white daughter, and he pretty much called it for what it was and told that neighbor if he had a problem with where the bus stop was, that was not a problem to address with the kids, but with the school. Then I think back on some experiences that have really impacted my family, but not necessarily me directly, but I witnessed it and realized how horrible it was. And so one example is my older brother. When he was about 16, he was really tall. He could easily pass for someone much older. He was walking home from school one day and was mistakenly racially profiled to be a wanted man. And so he did not have his ID on him. He just had his school backpack with his school supplies and what have you. And the police followed him home and came knocking on our door and wanted him to present ID and wanted to arrest him. And he was followed home because he was scared of the police and came home. So they followed him with every intention of arresting him. And my mom had to intervene and provide the ID and say, he is a 16-year-old child. And I remember how scary that was for him. And I truly can't imagine what that would have been like. But I was younger than him, and that was just something that is an early memory for us in the home. And more recently here in Ottawa, as previously alluded to, I was born and raised in Montreal, but I did move to Ottawa shortly after high school. We were at a Lone Star downtown with me and my younger brother and my dad, and there had been a prom student that year who had murdered one of his classmates. And so that was really, really horrific. And we were at this restaurant, and folks thought that he was the kid that was wanted. And as opposed to engaging with us, as opposed to the staff engaging with us, nobody said anything. We just were receiving these stares. And the saddest part is people were staring at us, and we were not really thinking it was that much out of the ordinary. And that's because my dad is a white man. And often when I'm out and about with my dad, another experience of mine is that people always think that we're in a relationship or that something weird's happening. So we're used to judgment, we're used to stares, we're used to assumptions being made. But that day in particular was really off. And sure enough, police swarmed our table and arrested my brother in front of everyone. unapologetically, and then they were able to quickly realize he was not who they were looking for. No apology was given. We were just pretty much, he was released, and they expected us to go on like the status quo, but we were just flabbergasted and uncomfortable, and of course we just made a not so quiet exit, and we were left with the embarrassment of that experience. When I think at the fact that microaggressions is a huge part of racism, it's very easy for me to come up with several examples of microaggressions I've experienced over the years as well. And a huge thing for me growing up in Quebec and being able to speak French and being fluent in French is the assumption that I'm from Haiti. And Haiti's a beautiful country. I have a lovely sister-in-law from Haiti, and that's great. I just every single time have to explain that, no, I'm actually from Quebec. No, but where are you really from? I am born and raised in Quebec, so that's where I'm from. If you want to know where my parents are from, my parents immigrated here from Trinidad. But having to make that clarification every time because there's that assumption, well, how could she speak French? She must be Haitian. Similarly, I get a lot of questions about my hair and assumptions that my hair is not real. And folks feel comfortable asking me if my hair is real. But in many settings, especially if a white woman does not have hair, folks aren't comfortable with that because folks are thinking, maybe this is someone with cancer, maybe this is someone sick. But when it comes to a black woman, the chances of her having long, beautiful hair, that seems very unlikely. So it must be that her hair is fake when, quite frankly, my hair is real. But a bigger question for me is, why does that matter? Why does it matter whether my hair is real or fake? Why does it matter whether your hair is real or fake? But the entitlement to ask that question is definitely a microaggression. Another common one I've gotten is, why do you sound so white? And the bias that comes to mind with that question really is that being well-spoken and articulate is that uncommon for black folk, and that is such an insult. Because I don't think I sound white. I think I sound like myself, and I happen to be someone that's educated. And so those are some historical examples I could think of. Unfortunately, 2 examples come to mind that would have been within the last month. And that's just to paint that picture that as a black woman, this is my lived experience. I'm a very passionate person. I talk with my hands. As I alluded to, I usually move around. I'd be taking up the whole stage if we didn't have the camera parked in one spot. So I'm often asked why I'm such an angry woman, and I'm everything but angry. And so unfortunately, something I lived with is passion. I'm a passionate person. I will own that I am a passionate person. But I live with that being a perception of being an angry black woman. And that's really disappointing. I was recently blessed with a promotion. I'm headed to Victoria with my wonderful fiance who's in the room, and that's for a management position in the government, which is very rare at my age, and I am truly blessed, and I recognize that to be a blessing. Unfortunately, I've been asked several times if I think that I got that position for my work to have met their diversity and equity and inclusion criteria. So that's disappointing, because that essentially is an insult to my hard work. It's an insult to all the experience I bring to the table, because it's saying they're fitting a quota, not you are a good fit for the position. And it's a question being asked, and a lot of these, like, is my hair real? Why do I sound white? These are questions being asked. And so the curiosity could be the extent of the intent. But I'm here today to talk about how those questions could cause harm. And these are things, again, I've been dealing with my whole life. And my catalyst for change really was the murder of George Floyd. In the heat of the pandemic, I really took pause about my life in general, where I wanted to be next, what I wanted to do, how I could make meaning, especially in a time period where I spent a lot of my days at home, And I think that For many reasons, the murder of George Floyd was very much televised, but I think the blessing with that is in the pandemic, everyone was at home to witness that. And so I think had this not been the pandemic, because of how often it is that Black folk are murdered, Indigenous folks are murdered, I think that if it hadn't been for the pandemic, this might not have blown up, because unfortunately this is a reality. But this was something that folks were able to pay attention to. And for me, it was the police being complicit in yet another murder of a Black man. And that was just enough for me to say, what can I do? I have all this time at home to be idle. What can I do? And I want to tell you a bit of about the actions I've taken, because for me, I don't even think that they're big actions. I think it's just ways to think of things that maybe you yourself can do as well to promote change and to fight racism. I started an anti-racism resource, and that was because some questions are not offensive, and some questions that I was being asked is, what can we do? How can we help? We feel strongly that this is wrong too, but we don't know what to do with that feeling. And so I, with a few other friends, created an anti-racism resource so folks could get educated and maybe inspired as well to do something and to feel empowered to do something. So that was the first thing I did. And then Samantha actually really helped me get out of my comfort zone. She was having one of her talks it's a series that she does monthly called Ask Me Anything, and it's in the public service. And she asked me if I wanted to be on the panel for Black History Month to talk about racism. And I was like, in theory, yes, that sounds like an amazing opportunity, but I don't think I'm the right person. I don't think I have a story to share. And she really helped me see that I did. And she empowered me to use my own voice. And so I did a talk, and it was spread interdepartmentally, and it's been viewed by thousands of people. And I was very honored to be a part of that. And then I felt like, oh, if I could do this, I could do anything. And then Brianna hooked me up with the Anglican Diocese YIP program, the Youth Internship Program. And I began to really do some anti-racism facilitations from there. And that's something that I'm very proud to say that I've been doing ever since. And creating an event, co-organizing an event with my amazing co-organizers, Brianna, Donna, Lee, who are here today, of course. That's another thing that I've done. What I'll do next, I don't know, but I will try to keep doing something. And I think even just the commitment to trying to do something is all we can do. And I encourage everyone to just try to do something to be a part of the solution and not the problem. I do want to take some time to talk about a very recent, amazing, incredible experience that I had. I went to a Black History Month gala recently with Samantha, of course. Samantha really keeps me on my toes and keeps me really engaged, and I really love her for that, because I've never felt more in touch with my Blackness, if I may, before. And so I went to this Black History Month gala, and I just was surrounded by Black excellence, and there were these very, very big, important people in the room, and I felt so honored to be in their presence. One of the people in the room was the brother of George Floyd, Terrence Floyd, and he was the keynote speaker for the event. And I wanted to share a few of the quotes that I received from him, because it resonates with me today. It was resonating with me when I was writing my talk for today, and I just wanted to be able to share it with you. And this is coming from someone who lost their brother to racism, murdered by the police. So we've got racism at play, and we got police brutality at play. And he was so gracious, and I just want to share these words because it was an honor to hear it directly from him. We must choose love over fear, love over hate, togetherness over division, inclusion over exclusion, and action over performances. We can never, and let us never, fall to hate, because there's so much power in unity. And one of the final things that really resonated with me from what he said, and I'll share it with you as if I were him. Every one of you in this room has the power to change things. You have the power to speak up, to speak out, to stand up, to use your voice for equality. You have the power, you have more power than you actually use. And that one really hit me. You have more power than you actually use. And the fight against racism should never be performative. If there's one thing I want folks to take away from what I've had to say today is educate and keep educating yourself, because we are all learning. We are all lifelong learners, and learning is a lifelong process. And try not to get down about the mistakes of your past. So if there was anyone in this room who's ever asked someone, is your hair real? Don't feel bad about it. You now know better, and you now can do better. And it's really important for each of you to realize the power that you have to speak up and speak out against racism, and to promote racial equality. If you hadn't before, certainly starting now. And I just encourage everyone to not get the fear of getting it wrong, have that fear really stop you from trying to get it right. And I will leave you with one final quote, and it's from the good Barack Obama. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and we are the change that we seek. Thank you so very much for listening.
Okay, so I was making notes while Susan was talking, and I have some questions for her. And if anyone has a question, feel free to, there's paper in front of you. Feel free to jot down your question, and we'll get to it. Thank you so much. I've heard Susan now say this story a few times, but it always rattles me. It's not just a story, it's her lived experience for her and for her family. And as a mother to two young, Black racialized young boys, like, I don't want anyone to ever have to go through like what your brother and your family has gone through. Like, so, you know, you did talk a lot without saying it, that the concept of white privilege, and that there's privilege out there. Either sometimes, I always say to people, we all have some level of privilege. It's just that some people have more than others, and it's understanding that continuum. So, can you share an example? And I think you already have, but what does it feel like to not have that privilege? What does that look like?
That's a really good question. For me, I think a big thing is always, and I have to say that racism can be internalized. So it's not to say that every setting makes me feel this way. Maybe at this point I've learned to feel this way, and I have some unlearning to do. But that's that I always feel as though I need to prove myself. So, you know, to really make sure folks are listening to me, to make sure they're really believing in my credibility. I find myself having to, you know, validate that, you know, I do have an education. I am, you know, I'm blessed to work in the public service. You know, I'm working in the public service because, you know, they trust in my credibility. But I do find that I can never take it for granted that my voice is not going to be silenced in a room, and that I have to make a point of trying to navigate, making sure my voice is heard, and feeling as though folks believe my voice is credible with not coming across as an angry Black woman. So I feel like having to navigate that equilibrium is very, very challenging, and I'd say that's probably the biggest example for me of not having white privileges, is maybe assumptions that work against me.
So I would actually flip some of the language you said. I think the public service is lucky to have you and blessed, not the other way around. So let's just, you know, and that is the truth. Like, you're truly an inspiration and a leader for all of us. something else you said, so we just finished having International Women's Day and a lot of statistics about, embracing equity when it comes to women. I think this also relates to what you just said. Susan said something about feeling like she has to work twice as hard. There's actually been studies that have tracked this, as simple as a woman is likely not to apply for a position and the higher up unless they are overqualified versus a male who might apply with just 60%. There's a saying that a lot of racialized BIPOC community members have heard since growing up: you have to work twice as hard than somebody else. So that might have been a nice motivator when you're young to take your kids, but I don't know if parents understood the harm that they were saying to their children so hard. I think I was one of those people who heard that, because what that means then is we both go into the position for 8 hours in a day, but I'm running on 200% all day. Well, what does that do to me as a human, right? Just take a moment to think about that. And I'm still in that space. I have experienced burnout. So I think these are real life things of privilege that we need to take a moment to just reflect on and really kind of change the script and really start making some changes. So thank you so much for those. This is something I've heard sometimes, and that people say in good nature that could be harmful. I don't see color, or I'm colorblind. Can you explain to me what that rhetoric's about and how we can sort of educate and move forward from that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue with that is we're not trying to, I don't think anyone should be having as a goal to see everyone in the same way. We are all different, we are all unique, we all have our different stripes from all walks of life, all of us. And I think that what's better than saying you don't see it is seeing it and honoring it in everyone. This isn't about being Black. This isn't about being Indigenous. This is not about being another person of color. This is just really about us being able to recognize that we all are unique. We all have our own lived experiences, and being able to celebrate that. I would love for someone to celebrate that they do see me. They see me in all of my colors, and that they can see that as a beautiful thing, in the same way that I could look at everyone in this room and see them in their colors and see that it's beautiful. And I say colors in this ironic way because there are so many different colors of clothing as well in this room, and I think being able to honor the color instead of pretend that you're not seeing it, I really think that is what is most important. So, being able to say I don't see colors, really saying that in order to accept you, I'm going to ignore a part of you, because our color is a part of who we are.
I love that. And I would almost say we can exchange the word color with layers and just embrace everyone's layers and colors. So thank you so much for that education, Susan.
Maybe you've seen this graphic floating around the internet. It was designed by Andrew M. Ibrahim, and he gives Ibram X. Kendi and other modern anti-racism writers credit for many of the ideas within the graphic. I want to give you a quick overview of it because it's a useful tool. And then I want to show you a similar graphic we made that focuses on an anti-racism continuum for the workplace. So let's get into Dr. Ibrahim's graphic real quick. This graphic is broken down into 3 phases. As a person on a journey towards becoming anti-racist, you fall somewhere within this continuum. Ibrahim breaks this continuum into 3 main groups: the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. You can see that in the fear zone, we're either denying that racism is a problem, or we're not interested in or willing to take action to combat it. That is a comfortable space for people with race privilege. People sometimes get offended by that term, race privilege, so let me quickly define it to ease any defensive feelings toward that. Someone's ability to be in the fear zone means that their life is not negatively impacted by the color of their skin. It's not saying that their life is easy, that they've not had to work hard, and it doesn't negate struggles. It simply means that their life is not negatively impacted by the color of their skin. That's race privilege. And it's important to know not everyone has that luxury. If you're ready to move out of the fear zone, then you start to do some of these things in the learning zone. Asking questions, reading books, evaluating your privilege, listening to people who look different than you. And guess what? Some of the things in this learning zone are going to be shocking and upsetting and uncomfortable, because you'll learn that things you hoped weren't true, in fact, are true. Now, when you start to learn about and get shocked by the experiences of others, then hopefully you become motivated to push yourself into the growth zone. You start to speak out. You promote and advocate for policies that are anti-racist, and you yield your power to marginalized groups. The important thing to know here is that in order to move through this journey, to transition from the fear zone to the learning zone to the growth zone, you have to put in work. You have to allow for mental shifts, and you have to allow yourself to be uncomfortable. Also, equally important to note is that hitting the growth zone is not an end. While it's your goal to get there, staying there requires constant work. That becomes clear when you realize that all of the items listed in the growth zone are activities and not mindsets. It's not a matter of thinking these activities are good ideas. It's a matter of doing these activities. Now, from what Dr. Ibrahim created, we came up with a similar continuum for the workplace, starting again with the fear zone. Within this zone, you're complacent working in an organization that excludes people of marginalized groups. You're complacent working in an organization that demonstrates inequity in pay, hiring, and leadership. You intentionally or unintentionally choose to work most closely with people who look like you. You either do not understand or do not believe in the value that diversity brings to an organization, or you make comments or jokes that oppress marginalized groups. This list can continue, but you get the idea. And so, what are some characteristics that you can work towards that indicate you're moving from the fear zone to the learning zone? You start to notice and question why inequalities exist within the organization. You support and follow company-wide practices designed to mitigate bias. You understand that an organization is better when the workforce is diverse. You lead by example and speak professionally and honestly about others. And then ultimately, you want to move from the learning zone to the growth zone. In the growth zone, you ask questions of HR or leadership where you see inequality. Understand that working with people who do not look like you or have a similar background as you promotes richness in the organization. Understand that diversity creates advantages in problem solving, development, brainstorming, and really any other facet of the business. You continue to lead by example and help people facilitate the uncomfortableness. You allow time for change, understanding not everyone is at the same stage as you, but you don't grow complacent. And if policies don't exist that mitigate bias, you do your part to put some in place.